Oh, very good. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Obviously, responsive design and HTML5 are not synonymous, but they do go hand in hand. And what we're talking about here today is literally something that we could talk about for 2 full days and not cover everything. But I'm going to give you the highlights right now. I'm going to give you the do's and don'ts, the things that you really should be careful of at the very beginning of your design of anything that's going to be going to mobile devices or to HTML5, period. Remember that HTML5 is not just something that goes to mobile, but all newer browsers on desktops also support it. Older browsers not so much. So we're in this kind of a interim stage right now where Flash is still is starting to really move out, and HTML5 has moved in. But there's a lot of organizations, including maybe some of yours, where you're still using older browsers on your desktops, and because of that, HTML5 is not necessarily something you can just jump to immediately if you want to be able to support them on your desktops as well. Okay, but let's start talking about what we're covering here today, because you saw the objectives, and I do have a handout that you guys should be downloading, or at least have downloaded or will download.
Hey, Joe, I want to make sure everybody understands where that is. There is a
Yeah.
materials pod right above chat, everybody, and the handout that Joe's going to be referring to is free for you to take, and you can download it. I would grab it before you leave the session because it won't be there after the session closes down, okay? So it's in the materials pod right above chat. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, worst comes to worst, you can always write me at joe@elearningjoe.com. If for some reason the download isn't working for you and you want to copy this, just yell and I'll send it to you. Okay, so basically what I just want to show you then is that in the handout, I have just about everything covered in there for you, including the whole idea about responsive design, the things that you should not do, and we're going to cover each of those now, and then also some of the useful features that are in Captivate as well. So it's got about 5 pages, but if you have any questions whatsoever regarding what's in there or something that's not in there that you have a question about, write me and I'll probably answer you. Probably, yeah, I usually do. So I'm going to jump out of this one slide PowerPoint and go directly into Captivate, where we're going to be discussing some of the things that you should be careful of. I'm going to take and open up right now a file that is a previous project that I've worked on in the past. And one of the most important things to understand, especially if you're going to be trying to take older lessons you've done and, in essence, upgrade them to HTML5 or to mobile, there's a few things you've got to be real careful of. And we're going to discuss each of these as well separately. But the first thing I want to point out to you is something that a lot of people aren't aware of, which is that in Captivate, you have a very useful tool called HTML5 Tracker. You can get to it one of two ways, under Project or under Window. The HTML5 Tracker will give you a list of everything in your file that does not work currently in HTML5. And the first thing you're going to notice here is all of these rollovers, right? We have a bunch of rollover slidelets in this particular project, and none of these are going to work. Why won't rollovers work on mobile devices? Simply put, there's no mouse. You can't roll over anything on a mobile device. You only have your finger, and as soon as you put your finger on the screen, it becomes a click. So there's no way to roll over, something, because there's no hovering state over on a mobile device. Yeah, some of the hybrid devices do have a mouse. I have this. I just got this little $100 Windows tablet thing, which is kind of cool and small, and it's a real Windows, a real Windows 8.1 device, so I can hook up a mouse and a keyboard, a Bluetooth keyboard, and all that to it. But that's a little bit different from what we're talking about, which is normally your iPads, your iPhones, your Android devices, etc., that are not.
Joe,
Yeah.
I actually, when I was teaching responsive design recently at a conference, a fellow in the back was shaking his head, no, 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 when I said not supported with rollovers, and he held up his phone, which now does support rollovers. You get close. And it's one of the few phones I've seen that does it, and of course he kept launching apps unintentionally. So the devices are coming that support rollovers, but the vast majority is like there's no way you can do a rollover.
Yeah, it's actually.
David is also in the chat pod asking about Captivate 8 and Firefox support. So if you know anything about the support, the not playing nice, I hadn't had any problems with Firefox. I mean, all
I
the
have,
browsers.
I have
Joe,
not
have you heard
either.
anything?
I have not either had any real problems with it, but I've heard other people have, And so, but I haven't investigated that to see what particular features in Captivate might be causing problems for them. And by the way, what you mentioned, Kevin, the first Android that came out with the idea of the hover feature came out about a year ago. But as you said, and I agree with you, it's such a minority of devices out there that support that. You really should not count on it at all.
Right, and the best part was, and Daniel was there when this fellow pulled out his phone. He kept saying, "Oh, I launched another program by mistake." So he's not even trying to launch stuff, and stuff's popping up all over his computer.
Yeah, I mean, if you hover your finger just slightly above the screen, it's all too easy. Your finger is not very. You can't keep it so steady all the time that you're not going to accidentally touch the screen once in a while. A mouse, a whole different story. Okay. Should I continue then?
Oh yeah, have at it.
Okay. If there are other questions, please chime in. And by the way, Daniel, if that was you asking about the Firefox support, email Kevin or me, either one, and we'll get you that. Well, I don't want to speak for you, Kevin, but I'm sure I can. In this case, we'll try to get you that answer. Okay, so what other things can appear in this HTML5 tracker? Well, anytime you do anything that is not going to be allowed in an HTML5 output. Why? Because HTML5 assumes that you're going to go to a mobile device as well. You may not. You may be creating HTML5 strictly for desktop, but that's less likely than the fact that you eventually at least want to go to mobile as well. There's a lot of things that in the Captivate window you'll find won't necessarily work, and so rollovers are one of them. If I go to objects, we have rollovers captions, rollover images, rollover slides. None of those are going to work in HTML5. By the same token, if I go to media and I choose an animation, so for instance I choose any Swift file, we got a lot of noise on the line. I'm not sure who it's coming from. Hopefully not me.
So I'm going to mute everybody except you. Hold on one second, okay? And I'll make sure I unmute you specifically. Hold on. All right, Joe, so you're unmuted. Go ahead, give it a shot.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, if you go ahead and just bring in a Swift file of any kind, like this one here, notice immediately it shows up here as well. Now, the cool thing about this window right here is that if you click on any one of these objects here, it's going to take you directly to the element that isn't working in HTML5. So here you'll see that it's jumping to the screen. Here it's going to jump to that one as well, and so on. By the same token, if I came over here and said, oh, let me do a text animation here, well, there's only one text animation that's guaranteed to work in HTML5, and that's going to be the typing one. So if I were to create a simple animation, a text animation here, I'll make it nice and big, so that now we have this, and we see over here in the properties window that that's using the aquarium effect. If I drop this down and choose a different one, all of these are text animations, so that they're nice for introduction screens, for closing screens, etc. But all of these are going to be they're not going to be supported in HTML5. Notice that when I chose the typing text one, though, that text animation is no longer listed here because that one is it is supported, but any other one there is not going to be supported. So there's a few things that you kind of have to worry about if you're going to take older materials, or if you're not really thinking about responsive design or HTML5 at first, but then you start to decide at a certain point you want to go to that route, and you haven't really thought it through until then. There's a few things you really have to be careful of, and I've listed a few others in the handout as well. If I go to a brand new file, and let's say I'm going to create a responsive design project this time. I'm going to say I want a responsive design project. When I do that, I'll see this time that there's a whole, oh, let me go back 1 second. I wanted to show you one more thing here, and that is if you have anything on your slide, for instance this right here, and I want to add an effect to it, you notice that on the screen that it shows you right here that if you see an effect that has 1 star, don't use that for HTML5 output because it's not going to work. If it has 2 stars, it's going to look different in HTML5 than it will in Swift. So you want to test that to make sure it's acceptable. So as I go and looking at these, for instance, I see that several of these under color effect are just simply not going to work in HTML5. Okay, Well, if I go back to here now, and this is my responsive design now, and I take something like a shape or anything really, it could be an image, or it could be a video, it could be anything, and I decide to add an effect, well, this time you'll notice that all those elements that are not supported in HTML5 are just simply not listed. So there you go. None of the ones that would cause you issues, those are my own, by the way, those Washington Pass, never mind those, but all of the ones there. So it does a good job of keeping track of the fact that you are working in HTML5 now, because responsive design is always HTML5, and because of that, certain things are just not going to be available to you. Remember our shapes, sorry, our objects over here? There they are, they're grayed out. You cannot choose a rollover because that will not work. Under media, if I choose animation this time, I'll notice that down here I don't see Swift, I only see the GIF files. So these are your animated GIFs. And as such, you can certainly use animated GIFs in HTML5 or in desktop as well. But earlier when I did the same thing over here on a non-responsive design one, and I said I want to bring in an animation, I had the choice of doing Swift or GIF, either one. So you see that Captivate's intelligent enough to say, if you start in HTML5, I'll make sure that you're not going to do something that you really shouldn't be able to do. Okay. Text and text animations are grayed out. Even though you have that one text animation that is allowed, the whole feature is turned off, in essence, in HTML5, in responsive design projects especially. So some of the things you cannot do: no rollovers, flash animations, text animations, and you've got to be careful about a lot of the effects that are available to you as well. These are all things that you've got to be careful of when you're doing mobile learning. Okay, now if you go to a website, okay, so for instance I come here, there's a number of areas, websites that can be very, very useful to you. One of them is viewportsizes.com, and if you go there /mine, it will tell you the resolution of your current monitor. This is especially important to go to on the mobile devices that you need to support when you are creating a mobile learning. So if you have to go to, say, iPhones of a certain generation, you want to make sure that you test this website, you run this website on those browsers, on those devices, so that you know what's going to work as far as resolution is concerned. Another one that's a favorite of mine is HTML5test.com. So what this one does is it gives you a score. And depending on your browser, depending on the version of your browser, depending on the device that you're running it on, it's going to give you a score up here. This is a very high score. Chrome actually has the best score of all of them, 511 out of 555 points at the moment. It also gives you a full breakdown of everything that's supported and not supported, but this is a little harder to interpret if you're not a hardcore programmer, because there are certain elements here that look as if there might be a problem. For instance, here under video MPEG for ASP support. Oh no, it sounds like MPEG is not supported here for video. Well, it is actually. It's just that this particular flavor is not, and that's not something you're likely to encounter when you're creating an e-learning piece. So again, focus more on this score up here. If I run the same website on Firefox, taking a look here at HTML5test.com here, I'll see that the score is not as high, but it's still going to be pretty high. Anything above 400 is probably a good score to get. If you go with IE, which I have down here as well, and go to HTML5test.com, you'll see that here the score is not going to be as high as 343. Now, if you're running IE8, I believe the score there is 100 something. I forget exactly what it is. And actually, that's IE9. IE8 has a score of 42. That's a pretty low score, and that's certainly not going to support HTML5. So these are some of the things you want.
David has a question here real quick, if you've got a second. Yeah, so in the chat bot, he's asking, how do you deal with initiating projects with clients? Do you typically define the browser and devise to use responsive projects? I mean, how do you approach that, whether you go responsive or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing I started to do several years ago is, and I change this all the time, is to create a series of questions that I have to have answered before I can start a project. At least most of them. It's not a really long list, especially the mandatory ones. But one of the things I have to know is what browsers need to be supported, etc. Because otherwise, this kind of thing can come back to bite you in the butt. Yeah, certainly, I've learned my lesson over time where I'll be told sort of verbally by the client, oh yes, everybody's using, for instance, Chrome version 36, and I'm like, wow, that's a really advanced version. But unbeknownst to them, there might be a satellite office that's still using IE8, and then you deliver, and they get all up in arms saying, well, it's not working, but you told me. So you got to have that stuff in writing, and you really have to, and once you get it in writing, they are a lot more careful about checking on things like that too, because now their name is going to be on that. So I've seen this happen over and over. Anytime you ask them to sign off on tech specs like that, they're going to be a lot more careful about making sure that they can actually support those specifications in there. So say it's Saint So. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Kevin, but okay. Anyway, the overall, yes, it is one of the things I have to have answered beforehand. And if you want to talk about how to deal with clients and the kinds of questions you should ask them early on, that's a separate discussion. You can write me, and I'll be happy to talk you through that as well. Okay, so this is another website you should know about. There's a bunch of other sites too that I'm not going to go into now, but if you're very interested in this, I can certainly give you more guidance there as well. Okay, so we've talked about a number of things already that you should not do. Let's talk about some of the things that, of course, you can do with mobile devices that you simply really can't do much with desktop. Okay, so one of the things that to be aware of is, of course, that that you have the ability to take advantage of some of the features on mobile devices, and it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you have this the fact that not everybody's going to have the same viewport size, not everybody's going to be looking at it landscape and versus portrait mode, but at the same time, you've got some nice features, and some of the features that you can use on a mobile device, which are starting to appear in products like Captivate and Presenter. Not quite there all the way yet, but I foresee a time in the near future when, yeah, you can actually use the camera on your cell phone or your iPad or whatever to respond to questions. You can use the microphone to respond verbally to questions, and you can see a lot of that happening now with some of the systems. I love languages, and so I use Duolingo, for instance, and that's probably one of the better websites that you can go to on a mobile device. It's actually an app that really takes advantage of the device's features so that you can use them to respond and have your voice picked up and so on. Okay, so having said all that, how do you take something that was working fine in desktop and make it work on a in a mobile world? So you have, for instance, the problems here where we discussed with HTML5, and you can see where the problems lie with HTML5 Tracker, etc. So how do I take something that's an animation, for instance, and suddenly make it work in a mobile world? You can't really. You can't just simply take a Flash piece and make it work. There are some tools out there that try to convert them, but they don't do a good job, at least not yet. And so you have to be looking at HTML5 animation tools rather than Flash animation tools. One of those is Adobe Edge Animate, and it's probably considered one of the better ones out there for that. Where is it? I usually have it right over here somewhere. Anyway, that's Inspect. Nope, not that one. Adobe Edge Animate, actually I don't need to show it to you, but it's here. Adobe Edge Animate allows you to create animations, and it's something I've just started to really play with, so I'm not really an expert in it yet, but it's what I've noticed about it is that it feels a lot like the features that were available in Flash 5 maybe, without all the action script and so on added in, but it's a very different environment as well. So if I want to go to a HTML5 animation, I believe I have one I can bring up. Let me show that here. If I say animation or HTML5 animation, either one will give me that ability. Well, no, it won't. This is the GIF only. If I go to HTML5 animation here, and I believe I have an example in one of, I forgot to prepare this ahead of time, but I'm pretty sure I know where it is. If I go to here, and my precon, and my exercises, and HTML5, all images, let's see, animations. Okay, so maybe I don't have it real handy, but let me see if I can find that when we have questions, and I'll show it to you, because that's one of the things I didn't think to prepare ahead of time. Is it here? Is it here? No. Okay, sorry about that. I'll look for that and show you that. But HTML5 animation simply is an animation that works in HTML5 because it's created for HTML5. So, having said that, here's an example. If I go back to my web browser now, and here's an example of a website that's completely built in HTML5, completely animated. This is one that's been done for Disney, and you can optimize it for speed or for graphics. I'm going to choose speed only because we're on a connection right now that may slow us down anyway. But the point of this is there's hardly anything you can conceive of that you can't animate in HTML5 nowadays. This is a website that is very, very rich in media, in music, videos, etc., that gives you examples of what's possible to do in HTML5. So nobody should be thinking that, oh gosh, now that we can't use Flash to create Swifts anymore, we're kind of screwed when it comes to animations and such. Not at all. In fact, you can do a lot with HTML5 animations now. But
can you copy and paste that URL into the chat pod? People
sure.
can click on that if they'd like to.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. And there was a question there from David J. about have you tried to export Flash Pro 2014? People are still using Flash. HTML5 content into Captivate. So I have not tried Flash Pro content. Have you?
No, I have not. However, one of the things to be aware of is that in Flash, I believe, yeah, I mean, I'm not a big Flash user, but what you're going to create are OAM files, and these are the HTML5 ready files that you can just bring into Captivate. That's why I was trying to find that one. In fact, why don't you guys take a second to go to that website and just move around. Use your mouse. You don't even have to click. Just move around with your mouse, and you'll be able to see things. And while you're doing that, I'll go find that other HTML5 animation. It's a real simple one that gives you an idea of the fact that I can show you the file that it runs. So I'm going to pause my screen here for a moment. That way you guys can check out your web browser. Click on that link that we put in the chat window, and I'm going to go find that animation that I was telling you about so that I can show you how you bring in an HTML5 animation into Captivate.
So Joe, to pause your screen up in the screen sharing area, just like GoToMeeting, you can just press pause.
Yeah, I did that. Did it not pause?
I think it did.
Yeah, it did. Okay.
Okay. So he'll be back in just a minute, folks, so they can still see his camera. He's looking for that picture on his computer. Feel free to continue putting your questions into the chat pod, and as they come in there, I'll read them out loud like I've been doing for Joe, so he can focus on his screen.
Yeah, I found the files now finally because I just did a search, and I found them.
So you can bring up your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back into Captivate and show you what I was talking about here. Let me go to the right folder. Okay, so some of the HTML5 animations that you can that I have here that I can show you. If I go to Media and HTML5 animation, and I go to where I have those stored, here's 4 different ones, and you notice that they have an OAM extension. That's the extension that is created by Edge Animate specifically for Captivate. I mean, you also have the alternative, or you can do both, where you have it set out as an XML file, and then you can use that in other ways too. But the OAM is one that works within Captivate. Now, the nice thing about this is that with HTML5 animations is that you could hover and immediately see the animation working, which you cannot do with normal Swift files in Captivate. but at least here you can see it, and you can also, of course, make things bigger, smaller, rotate them, whatever you want to do there. If I bring in a different one, in fact, I'll delete this one. One that I've used in my classes is this one here. Oops, that's not the one. Let me go back to the other, which was Sun Moon. Sun Moon, where are you? I have you here. And open that location. Okay, and let's go there. Sun Moon here is a simple one that that just shows you the moon going around the sun with its different phases. I can again increase the size of this. I can also change its resolution, etc. But when I preview the project here, you'll see that the animation looks correct on the screen. And I can change, a number of factors about this. But that's just a simple HTML5 animation showing the phases of the moon that was done very quickly in Edge Animate. Again, examples of that, but this is just one simple example. But if you're looking at that website, my goodness, you can really go all out with animations in HTML5. There's no reason why you can't do whatever you want there. So what are some of the things you can do in Captivate with responsive design? Let me get rid of this and point out a few things here. Let me get a show of hands. We can do that, right? You got the little hand raise there?
Yeah, the hand raise tool, everybody can hit that. There's right by the, on the little panel with the red arrow, there's a hand raise tool. You guys can find that and go ahead and click it when he calls it out.
I'd just like to ask the question, how many of you actually have created a responsive design project in Captivate 8 already?
Give a hand raise, folks, if you have.
If you have.
So Nina has, I'll tell you, you won't be able to see the hand raises, Joe, so I'll tell you.
Okay.
So Nina has, David J has, most people have not. So, there's Chuck. Chuck has, it looks like maybe 3 or 4 people have, Joe.
Okay, well that's about what I expected, because a lot of people are still testing the waters, and there's a few things that you really should know about responsive design. I'm going to try not to go over too much, but I'm just going to spend a few more minutes talking about this, because when you're talking about responsive design, you're really talking about 3 different viewports that Captivate offers you. You'll notice up here that I have a primary viewport. This is my normal desktop view. When I click on the tablet view, I'm seeing a resolution, a default resolution for the tablet, for an iPad, for instance, and then I have the smartphone view or the mobile view, which is of course a different resolution again. So if I'm looking at each of these sessions here, or each of these viewports here, what happened when I inserted this star shape, it also shows up in the other viewports, right? And if I were simply to preview this and say I want to preview the project with nothing else but a star in there, I'll also see here that I see all 3 viewports here, and in fact I can take this blue lever here and move it so I can see what would be different. That's showing me how many pixels wide my screen is now, 913, or my viewport is 846, etc. And as I move it up and down, you'll see that it's changing to show me what it's going to look like at each level, right? If you go to most corporate websites now, so if I go, for instance, to my own eLearning Joe, you'll see that most of them are no longer offering, well, that's interesting, no longer offering a mobile version anymore, not like they used to. Instead, what they do is they're responsive as well. So here, for instance, when I take the browser here on my website and I move it back and forth, you see that it's changing. Now this would be the mobile phone view. You'll see that things have disappeared. When I go to the tablet view here, it looks different, and when I go out to the desktop view, of course, you see a different version there. And that's exactly what we're trying to do now in Captivate, right? We're trying to build it so that depending on the width of the browser, it's going to show a different version of our project. Why are we focusing so much on the width and not on the height? You can click on View Device Height here and also see that this is 450 pixels high and this is 627, and this is 627 as well, and then I can change my height by dragging this up and down. But the height is actually not as important as the width. Why? Because the width is really what's going to determine what's going to the width of the mobile device is going to determine which viewport we're going to look at. If you change the height, it may end up meaning that they're going to need to scroll up and down to see your whole e-learning piece, or it's not going to take up the full height of their mobile device. I tend to find that I don't have to change the device height much. Sometimes it makes sense, but most of the time it doesn't. Okay, that's why it's normally turned off, and you don't have to touch it too much. But you can also change what the primary view should be here. If I say, well, a lot of people's desktops, can't support more than 950 pixels width, that's fine. One of the things you notice that in any website, in any browser, is that your width is hardly ever going to be crimped. This is my width. It's got a few pixels here, and it's got my scroll bar over here, but it's really the height that has things robbed from it, right? So you've got the bookmark here, you've got the URL line, you've got perhaps tabs at the top, and sometimes at the bottom you have status bars. Those are the things that take away space from your height, but not necessarily as much taken away from your width. So that's good to know, and that's why we focus more on the width anyway. One of the things to think about for the height is that if you are going to use a play bar, so if I go to project and then my skin editor and I see my play bar down here, that is something I rarely use in my Captivate files because I tend not to create linear courses. I don't want them to simply jump, without actually working on a slide, for instance. I want the slide itself to dictate when they should move forward, etc., not artificially by saying, oh, we're not going to let you go forward until you've seen, everything here. But they're making choices. They're engaged. They're being challenged, and they're coming to meet that challenge. That's the sort of thing that I like to do, and so I tend not to have these. But let's say you do have these. Well, the height of this is 24 pixels, so you have to also subtract that from any height if you're going to make sure it's going to work on those mobile devices. Okay, so real simply put, you've got the primary, you've got the tablet, you've got the mobile views. Think of these as generational. You've got the grandparent view here, you got the parent view here, you have the child view here. Anything I do at this level, if I were to take this and simply move it to the right, it's going to be reflected at the parent view and the child view. But let's say I change something at the parent view. I take that star now and move it down like so. Well, I'll see that the child view has also moved, but the grandparent has not, because a child cannot tell its parent what to do, or its grandparent for that matter. So the parent is not able to tell its parent, the grandparent, what to do, only the child. Okay, so we know that if we take and move things around at this level, it's going to also move them at the sub-generations, but not going up the scale. However, there's an exception to that. If I were to take now my mobile view, and okay, Chuck, no problem. We'll talk to you soon. If I take my mobile view here and I move the star now to there, okay, remember that's not going to change the other views, right? They're still wherever I left them. But let's say that now I take this and move it over to there. I see that my tablet and my mobile views have not changed. Why? Because I explicitly had changed those earlier. Let me illustrate this one more time by taking this and deleting it. Once you delete it off one view, it deletes it off all views. It's a drastic thing to do to delete something. So now there's nothing left. Let me take and bring on that star again. And this time, when I go, and of course now I see that those are in the same place. But if I were to now come to my mobile view and move it to there, and this is still in its original location, and so is this. If I now were to move this to there, the tablet view will have moved, but the mobile view will have not moved because I explicitly had moved that, and it doesn't want to second guess me. It says, okay, you did move that there on purpose, so I'm not going to force a move just because you moved it here. On the other hand, let's say you did want to have all the views have this move in all the views. You can right-click and say, I want to apply the position properties to all the views. And when you do that, now they all will be in the same place in each view. Finally, let's say that I come here and I say, I only want this in the grandparent view. Okay, I want that right there in the middle, but I don't want that in the other views. Okay, well, I can now right-click on that and say Exclude from other views. And now when I come to the other views, you'll see that they are off the stage. They're no longer on the stage and they no longer will be seen. If I want to have the tablet not have it on the stage, I wanted to keep it off stage, but for some reason I want the mobile view to have that back on the stage, well, all I have to do is drag it on to the stage again, and you'll see that the other views are still where they were earlier. So there's a lot of power here going on with objects on the slides, because you can dictate when you want something to resize and to move, or you can tell it not to do that at all. And finally, I can also say I want to exclude. I want to exclude from other views. I want to apply the position properties to all views. I do that here again, and guess what? Now everything is back where it would have been had I never done anything at all except to move this one here. So you see that there's no mistake you can make or experiment you can try that is not fixable. You can change those back to where you wanted them to be. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up here because there's a lot more we can talk about here, but I want to point out a few more things. First of all, in here you have the ability to say that you want to, let me get over to the right place, the position here. You have an option called Smart Position. When you click that, you'll see up here a bar that tells you this is 25% from the top, this is 40% from the left. And that's why these appear here as well, so that if I were to take this now and say move it up to there, where now it's 78% from the left and 15% from the right, from the top, the same thing goes there. Using percentages means that in most cases it's going to look correct at each of the locations. If I were to take it now, move it to here, for instance, and then look at these, I see that they kind of rise up a little bit, okay, because the 67% to the top of this is a larger star than on the other views. So now when I look at this view, it's still 67% up here, but because the star is smaller, it's not going all the way to the bottom. The same thing with this one here. It looks even higher from the bottom, and so percentages don't always work correctly if you have situations where it's more on the right and at the bottom. So you can change that. You can make things different. So for instance here, if I were to take this, let me just start over. If I were to take this same shape, and now I'm going to change that so that the width and the height are swapped here. That's the size, that's the top and left, and that's the bottom and right. If I were to change these, for instance, to pixels, and then over here said I want to have the height of this be a pixel and the width of this be auto, well, now the width of that's going to be auto, but the object height is pixels. Well, 186 pixels is not going to look all that different here, except on this view here, especially because now the height is actually dictating this is going to be 186 pixels, period. If I were to now take this and move it down to here, what's happening is that now you start to see that it's going off the screen because you're dictating a certain amount of pixels rather than percentages. In some cases, though, it makes more sense, and so depending on how you're placing it on the screen, if it's not allowing you to, if it's not showing correctly, you want to start changing some of the abilities here from pixels to percentages, percent relative as well. Percent relative is simply this. If I were to take this again, and I'm going to bring it one last time on the screen, if I were to take a percent relative option, so for instance I say I want to have this here percent relative, I can make that relative to another object or to the side of the screen by taking this and dragging it to, for instance, the right or in this case, the right side of the screen, like so, and take the top, for instance, and have it go to the bottom. Oops, I gotta actually be able to see the whole thing here. So let me just close. I'm working in a weird view right now. I want to close that and close timeline. So now, if I would take that, I can drag it down to the bottom, and thereby now it's all based on the right and the bottom of the screen. All right, so there's a lot more that we can talk about here, but I hope I've given you enough to chew on with the basics, and I'm happy to stick around as long as necessary to see if there are any other questions here as well. If you want to, you can write me, and I'll answer your questions that way too. But in meanwhile, I'll stop right here, and that way you guys have time for questions.
Awesome.
More
Joe.
questions.
Awesome. I'm going to let's go ahead and open this up to questions. If you guys have a question, just to keep I'm going to unmute. Let's take a chance at unmuting. And therefore, you guys can basically give a hand raise if you have a question for Joe, or put it in the chat pod, so we don't all talk at one time. Who has questions for Joe? Joe, that was awesome. Thank you. Questions? Now we got to bring out the quiz. Is what we have to do now. Joe, do you have the quiz ready to go? No.
I had muted myself. Yeah, unfortunately the quiz got lost in the snow, so you guys are
no quiz. All right. Hey, it looks like Judy has a question. Judy, we didn't give you a chance to say hello. I don't think. Did you come in late a little bit? Go ahead and say hello there, Judy.
No, actually, I got to say hello twice.
Oh, that's right. You know, Judy, we haven't heard enough from you. Go ahead. What's your question, Judy?
I was just going to tell Joe, I found out that on some of when you go to the tracker, the HTML tracker, that if you take an animated, like an arrow, a 3D arrow, if on your PCs, it will show a blinking arrow or a moving arrow or whichever one you choose. However, on an iPad, even though it says it's not going to, when you go to the tracker, it says it's not going to be supported, it will be a stagnant. So it's not like...
Yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier. When you use a flash animation, and that's actually in my handout, so you can read it there. When you use a flash animation, it doesn't simply not appear at all. It does appear, but only the static frame at the very beginning of that animation. So for text animations, for instance, you notice that in the HTML5, or sorry, in the responsive design approach, we didn't even have the option of bringing in a text animation. But if you have a text animation that you have built in a project, and now you try to go to and publish that to HTML5 by just simply going to publish and saying I want to publish for devices or publish to computer, I want HTML5 there, that what you'll see on the screen is sample text and perhaps one little fish, you know, there as well. But it's a static image, not an animation any longer. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Anybody else have a question there?
I believe that's called graceful deprecation. Is that right? It's a fallback position. If it can't do the animation, well, it's at least going to give you the image. Yeah.
All right, Joe, I'm going to take you off the hot seat there.
Okay.
And bring up my system just to say good night to everybody. You guys, hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, and take care, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you both.